This is Jon Reed, Diginomica, and yes, I am back for more, and guess who's back in the chair? Brian Sommer.
Well, I know you've had other people here, like Josh Greenbaum, who are more photogenic than I, but...
I don't know, man, with your jacket and tie, man, it's hard to beat. It's hard to beat. By the way, folks, we are at the Epicor Insight event in Nashville, and we happen to be at Brian's favorite hotel in the world, the Gaylord.
Oh, God.
Congratulations, Brian, you're back.
If anybody from Marriott Corporation's listening, you better turn off the podcast now. I might be saying something about the Gaylord any moment.
My only disappointment is that I go out to the Gaylord Biodome and I can't see Pauly Shore anywhere, and it's just so disappointing.
Well, and I can't see a Dr. Pepper either, so that puts us even.
Brian's low on Dr. Pepper also, which doesn't help his mood. But anyway, we have spent the day with Epicor at Epicor Insights. We've had one day to kind of get all of the updates on their AI strategy and all of that. And so, this isn't the full Epicor rundown because you've got more meetings tomorrow and I'm going to head out. But let's see what we can make of what we saw today and how this might change our view of Epicor and what it's trying to do. So, Brian, should we do some numbers to start out?
Yeah, let's go for it.
What do you got?
Well, I think listeners ought to know that this is not a small and unsubstantial ERP software company. They have been in business, believe it or not, since 1972. And I just want you guys on the line here listening to this to wrap your head around the state of technology in 1972. So anyway, They've been there, seen it, done it. We even saw a quick slide montage today where they were showing books on MRP, then MRP2, then ERP, and other kinds of adjustments over time. Right now, the company seems to be doing, I think it was 1.5 billion in revenue. That's billion with a B.
By the way, they're privately held.
Privately held, and they are on... There's like 3 private equity firms that have been involved with them. KKR is one of them. I think their position's already gone by now, but they've also had stuff from a company called QVC and another one more recently, CD&R. So private equity is definitely in there. Company's got about 2.3 million users, we believe, and 23,000 customers. We would, of course, this is a privately held company, so I would advise anyone double check any of the numbers, but we're pretty good on these.
That gives you ballpark at any rate.
Right. It's not small.
I think one interesting thing just to frame this conversation, if listeners are like, why should I care about Epicor? I think there's a couple really interesting things. One is the manufacturing focus and the sort of laser focus on how manufacturing is changing. And Brian, I'm sure you'll want to get into that when we go back to your overview. But when we hear about this whole SaaS-pocalypse narrative, right? Epicor is kind of a classic company that you might hear getting picked on or whatever, like, oh, it's a system of record. Now, Epicor is going forward with like, we're a system of action, and we'll kind of get into what they mean by that. But I think Epicor is a textbook example of why the SaaS is dead narrative is 2/3 BS. Now, 1/3 is interesting and should be talked about, and I've talked about it a lot on my podcast. But as we get into that, I think we can kind of explain a little bit about how the expertise in the industries they're attached to, I think, is pretty core to the AI that enterprises need. But anyway, I think that would be an interesting way to think about this company is they have no intention of being a system of record dismissed by agentic startups, so we shall see.
Yeah, and I think they're in hard industries. I mean, manufacturing, they've got trucking, fleet management, and a whole bunch of other stuff. They're not, they have not shied away from some of the tougher areas where software has been deployed for decades. To your point, I look at the audience that's there today. I could tell some of them were hearing headless server, for example, maybe for the first time. And I don't think they even fully understand that yet. I'm not saying the audience is naive, but I am saying that I don't see an immediate threat that they're all going to run out and go get some pure play AI stuff. They're not that dumb. They're not. It's almost like it would be an insult to underestimate the savvy these folks have. They've been making parts and products and shipping stuff for decades to people, and they do it because they really understand their craft, but they also do it because they're good at what they do, and they've made do with a bunch of, different kinds of solutions for years. I don't think they're going to just willy-nilly all of a sudden do something stupid and throw everything away to go embrace something that 3 people wrote in a weekend using a commercial grade AI product. I don't see that happening. I don't. I haven't believed in the SaaSpocalypse since before it even had that name. And I know we don't want this conversation to devolve there, but yeah.
Especially since we've already taped podcasts on that before, which you can check out. And look, it's not that SaaS and software vendors aren't under some pressure to change as well. I'm not saying that, but that's a different conversation than we're going to have today. Look, so a little bit more on just painting the picture of Epicor. Their go-to cloud release is called Kinetic. Their AI is largely predicated on a journey to the cloud that many of their customers have taken. Less than half are still on-prem, from the best of my understanding. Again, Brian's numbers disclaimers apply here. And then their go-to cloud releases, they have a few different packages. Kinetic's really their go-to release, but you'll also see Epicor P21 come up, another cloud release. It's the vast majority of their cloud customers are on those releases. And Epicor has officially said that they're sunsetting their on-premise version, and that AI experiences and functionality will largely be tied to the cloud platform. So anyway, that's sort of the customers have to kind of fashion their future around that Epicor narrative.
One final on the customer. If you don't know that much about this company because they're not kind of in your face on their advertising and airport billboards everywhere and all that stuff, I get it. But you ought to know that there were 4,100 plus people in attendance at the show today. So it's not exactly a secret. They're bigger. They're definitely bigger than you probably think they are.
So Brian, let's take a step back. Epicor, we've heard basically just about every ERP vendor this year make their AI case, and to some extent, that's a challenge, right? Because a lot of the same principles of better data quality, better context for agents are kind of like the bread and butter of what enterprises are doing, and I think in a very good way, not a bad way, in terms of what those vendors are doing. But it also means we kind of hear the same things in some sense again and again. When Epicor went out there and made their so-called cognitive ERP, which is another one of their phrases, right? System of action, they made their case. What was your take on that as a jaded observer of these things?
Been there, seen, and heard it.
Yep.
The agentic, almost every vendor will tell you their agentic story, and they marvel in their own journey of self-discovery and how they came to learn all about this, the power of agentic AI. And then they get all wrapped up in telling us about how they've now put together a marketplace around agents, how they built a studio set of tools to build agents, et cetera, et cetera. All the vendors, the major vendors, seem to have a lot of these same elements to their current narrative right now. Are they different? Yes. Is the differentiation immediately visible to people? Not really. And part of that's because I watch these vendors, I've been watching them for a year now. When they do demos, they fly by the stuff usually on the screen. At least the Epicor people had more patience and let us actually kind of see what was going on as they were trying to race through some of these agentic demos, and kudos for them for doing that.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I write a lot about these topics on Diginomica every week on the weekly and stuff, and I generally like the fact that enterprise software vendors are working so hard on AI security, governance, and context. And I think they're actually moving towards better AI. And what's fascinating about this is that, I don't think the frontier models have done a good job at all, the Anthropics and OpenAIs of the world, at creating products that are quote unquote safe for consumers to use and all of that. And so I think enterprise vendors are actually taking something of a leadership role in that area, which is a very unpopular view, but the hell with it, that's what I believe. Having said that, it was interesting, and I did notice some differences in the messaging, which I will get into in terms of some of the details of their AI offering, but that's for later. For now, what I wanted to mention to you, because I think you noticed this too, is when CEO Steve Murphy came on stage, one of the things he just really started with was, I'm going to share my AI research with you, the customers in the audience. And he went into a pretty candid pros and cons of this technology discussion that I thought was pretty compelling.
Yeah, and I think it was it worked with the audience. The audience realized that this is someone who was turning over rocks and reporting warts and all what he was discovering and experiencing, and it was in the first person, the way he described what he did. And I'd say don't underestimate the power of that with an audience, because audiences want to believe that an ERP vendor is going to be around longer than their marriage, a good 10, 15, 20 years. And some of these folks have been with Epicor since the start in 1972, possibly. They value that kind of, they are loyal to their supplier of software to an extent. And I think he had to make some of these points just to be credible. If he came out doing some of the rah-rah cheerleading stuff that I've seen some other software CEOs do, I think it would have really fallen flat with his customers.
And just to give you all a sense of this, I'll just give you a couple of interesting quotes. They talked about the progress that Epicor has made with Prism and prompt engineering. Prism is sort of some of the core of their agent orchestration and building. They talk about our best prompt engineers are experienced, which is kind of like illustrating that engineers aren't really going away. Don't count on LLMs to be inherently creative. You are still dealing with binary. You don't hear that very much from the keynote stage.
No, you got to tell you, that's probably the first time I've heard binary come up in any of these in a while. We just need bespoke to go with it.
Yeah,
and we're good.
Very candid. I'll run you through a few more. AI is powerful and frightening. AI has been blamed for 100,000 corporate layoffs, but Steve begged to differ. He thinks AI will create jobs. He says the knowledge gap is real. He thinks the forces of competition are real. In other words, there's a lot of opportunity to compete with this technology. And most importantly, the conditions matter. You need to build your AI around specific use cases, which leads into things like time to value, world models, which is one of Epicor's phrases for some of the stuff they're trying to do. Anyway, pretty interesting overall. And look, I mean, I could pick some nits. I actually think that the more you study the technology of today's AI, I don't actually think it's all that powerful and frightening. In fact, it becomes less frightening the more you understand how it works. I think the frightening thing is really more how a handful of big AI companies are controlling so much of where civilization is going to. A handful of dudes are deciding everyone's future with very little regulatory accountability. So I think that's the frightening part at the moment. So I might like to have a conversation with him about that at some point. But for the audience, the point is that they had a candid exposure to the pros and cons of the technology in language that they can understand. So that sort of set the tone for the day. Brian, you have a list of things you want to talk about. There's a few more on it. So where do you want to take us next?
Well, I thought there were a couple of items that could have gotten more air cover today. And of course, this is, please don't hammer us because we're picking on some things, because there's never enough time in every keynote or whatever conference to cover all the subjects. One of the questions, though, is how they're using some of their new AI technology to help the on-prem customers move to the cloud and to the new AI kind of solutions. They've definitely developed tools to make not just only data mapping, but data cleansing and other things really come to life. And their whole point in doing this is to get the cost and the friction out of the way. They want to be able to dramatically reduce implementation times to next to nothing now.
They had a customer that had gone live in 2 weeks, though they did quickly make a point that that's not always going to be the case or whatever.
Right.
But
it's important people understand directionally where things are going and what these tools can or cannot do. And the same tools that could be used for implementations, conversions, everything else are also the same kind of tools that could be used that agents can use to do massive kinds of changes or read external data files and other kinds of information. So that I think was right on. The thing, if you can get the implementation cost down to a 10th, a 100th of what it was in the past and the elapsed time, that really changes the economics of deals. And that leads us to, I think, another area I want to talk about, which is we didn't really hear much about ROI at this conference. And yet a week or so ago, I'm at Boomi, and ROI just was coming out about every 10th slide. We were hearing about that. What we didn't see were tools that help you understand your current processes, workflows, and so forth, that know and suggest what future ones could be your to-be world. And any kind of other benchmarks, templates, policies, compliance matters, and everything else you might want, that throw it all together, and it tells you what the new kind of structure and the potential savings are going to be. That I would have liked to have seen something there, because without it, it just I think companies need the access to these kinds of knowledge tools so they can make better, more informed decisions that get them out of all the whatever customizations, the one-off kind of stuff that they've got, the things that are out of policy, out of compliance, that are not a standard operating procedure. They need to kind of move past that and then focus on things that are going to really help them differentiate themselves in the market. So that's one I would like to see more of.
Just to give you some idea of this, I really liked when they went into some of the AI vision piece. And I think it was Arturo, who's one of their AI leads, to oversimplify his job title. He talked about 5 things they're working towards in the future. Governance is product, which I really like. It's like kind of how do you, instantly update all these agents with the latest, governance frameworks and all of that and deliver that. Headless experiences, which you already mentioned, ontology and reasoning. Mm-hmm. They've got a pretty sophisticated ontology system. Community intelligence, which I want to get back to you, Brian, because that includes the aggregated data. I want to talk about that with you in a minute. And platform scale. Now, I really like that comprehensive future thing, but pull back a minute. What is the average customer to make of that, right? And I talked with Arturo about that in our meeting later, and he acknowledged that that's like a challenge, right? As far as how do you then bring that to what the customer needs to hear? And I think they could have done more with that during the keynote, and I'll talk about what I think they could have done. But that kind of illustrates the dilemma that vendors face, right? Which is customers want them to charge forward with this great future, but they also don't want to be left behind, right? They want to understand what the next steps are. And I think that is where, Epicor will have to make sure they do it. And I thought it was really interesting talking with Arturo about this because the trendy term right now is forward deployed engineers. Mm-hmm. And this has been used by like OpenAI and Anthropic to talk about like how they want to go into the enterprise. And some of it makes a whole lot of sense, but Arturo was saying that he's used that term internally for several years. And the idea is that every single software engineer at Epicor needs to be out in the field, meeting with customers and tying their AI into the intimate knowledge that they have of their customer requirements and needs, right? And I think that is a really good approach to software engineering, and I think they could have done more to kind of make that feel real in the keynotes. Do you know what I mean? I don't think there was as much of a sense for customers of like, here's how we're working with you on this stuff. So I think that's something they can work on for next time. But I like that that's their practice, because ultimately that matters a lot more than keynotes are hard, right? And we can pick holes in keynotes all day long, but it's more about like, what are you doing day in, day out?
That goes to the heart of a real problem that's been an issue in ERP implementations for more than a decade now. And that is, you've got specialists who phone in their piece of the implementation. Like, I'll convert your old invoice data to put it in the new system, but I have no idea what it really does or what happens to it, because all I do is just remap data. So when you have those they're specialists who don't really understand the big picture. And when you have these engineers that they can do a lot of stuff remotely, yes, but then when they show up and try and execute like new agents they've built with clients, and they're sitting down right beside them, they're going to realize there's a whole bunch of like aha moments they never would have picked up if they're trying to do this remotely and off a conference call. Admittedly, I've always spent my career making it a point to be on site and visit with customers frequently, not every day, but frequently. Why? Because you learn so much just by walking around and in some of the interesting kinds of observations you make when you see people actually like struggling to get some work done, or maybe they're struggling with some other unrelated system that you weren't even working on, but now you realize I have an opportunity that will make my clients' lives infinitely better that they didn't even realize was a possibility for them. And that's really, I think, what the value of having these people is. They can open up these customers to whole new possible outcomes they never would have imagined. And unfortunately, and even in an AI age, people-to-people interactions are still going to guide some of the more interesting aspects of work and tech.
When I met with Arturo, I mentioned a few things that I thought were different about how they talk about AI, because I kind of started out by saying a lot of what you said is similar to what everyone else said, like, and I didn't want that to sound like too critical. And so I was like, but here's the part. Because look, I mean, everyone's got to check off boxes around governance and security. It's just a fact, right? Everyone's got to say that stuff. But I do want to point out one thing.
How they do it is the real problem.
It is, indeed. But I want to say one thing that I think they did stand out in. And Arturo, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry, because I totally forgot to mention this to you. But this jumped out at me. The headless experiences thing might sound a little abstract, but they made it real for customers. One part of it, when they talked about, we're not here to tell you how to use your data or which tools to use. You can draw on Epicor in whatever AI you want to use. Like, they were very open about that. You can use your own MCP client. You can do what you want. They emphasized that a lot, and other vendors have kind of paid lip service to that, but this was core to their messaging. And if I'm a customer, I find that pretty refreshing to know that you're not going to force this sort of one way to use our APIs, which a lot of vendors have stumbled on this spring, with, our products are better or our way of doing this is better. I thought that was a really smart approach because ironically enough, when you say it that way, I think customers are more likely to use your stuff because you're not forcing it down their throats,
I would agree, because there have been vendors who view their AI technology platform as if it's the way, the light, and only the true believers will get the full benefit, because you've used their tools. I'm sorry, I didn't buy it then, don't buy it now. And I agree with you. I think customers also smell a money grab and a lock-in strategy. And they're not dumb. They've seen this movie before. And so when you have an ERP vendor kind of overreaching, trying to get even more of your wallet, and they don't really deserve to get it, you're going to find customers pushing back on that. You're grinning.
Because you called up in my mind your infamous wallet fracking phrase.
Oh, yeah.
Do a search on wallet fracking, Diginomica on a search engine of your choice, and you'll find some stuff from Brian. But it's always a classic. And I think it's a really good approach that they're taking there. And I'm sure that as customers look at their options, they'll be really glad that they don't feel like Epicor is another one of those vendors that's looking to extract money. And especially because right now, everyone is still trying to figure out some of the basics of how to price AI. This was a discussion we had with executives at lunch. This isn't the right time to be like, let's extract as much profit from our customers as possible on this technology. This is about helping your customers to advance, So.
Yeah, I thought they were very different from several of the vendors we've dealt with. They have no appetite to charge tolls for people to get access to data that's in an Epicor cloud system. No, they're not. If I want to say they were the most hands-off about, or laissez-faire, I don't know what the right word I'm looking for here is, but they were, the last thing they were coming across as someone who is going to be incredibly greedy and going after, again, a wallet fracking approach to customer relationships.
I think the one interesting challenge that they're going to have is they are doing something that a lot of vendors are doing, which is they're aware of the security challenges that agents can pose, because giving agents access to your ERP environments can wreak a lot of havoc if you don't constrain them properly. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, do a search for Louis Columbus and his pieces on VentureBee, because Louis is all over this every week. There's a whole lot to cover there. But they are tying their AI developments to cloud adoption for that reason, because through the cloud deployments, they can manage those security issues. But it does raise questions for customers that are not, for whatever reason, ready for the cloud move yet. And you can classify those customers into different categories, because some of them strongly feel that for regulatory reasons, they need to not be in those types of cloud environments. And it will be interesting to see what Epicor does for those, because those are customers that want to be modern, but maybe just have security and regulatory reasons why they cannot put data in public cloud areas. And so, I assume, from what I heard from Epicor today, that they're going to work really hard on solutions to those customers, because they want to be in the cloud, but under different terms, right? So Epicor will figure out a solution for them. But the classic question then becomes, what do you do about the on-prem customers that still want to absorb innovation from you, but aren't ready to migrate? And, that's tricky, right? Because Epicor is sunsetted those customers for now. And, so it'll be interesting to see, how you help people advance, because, the thing you have to remember is that right now, every customer is going to get pitches from AI vendors, and AI vendors that tell you, we'll build something for you today. How good that'll be, I don't know, but they're going to pitch it, right? And so you got to be ready for that. And so Epicor's got to be ready for it too, because some customers are going to be like, I'm not ready to do a migration, and I think the part of their answer is, well, what if you could do it in a month? And so I think they're trying to make it really exciting and easy for customers to just migrate to the cloud and get their AI from Epicor. So they got pretty good answers to that, but I think it's just an interesting question, because, all the big AI companies are going to come knocking and say, hey, get started with us today. So we shall see.
I want to go back to one point, though, you came up a few minutes ago. That had to do with Steve's keynote, where he was talking all about his observations around AI. And one of the items that popped up, I believe I'm referencing the right session. He mentioned how are we going to have no one in the middle of an agentic process? Are we going to have a person in the middle or in the flow? Or are we going to have multiple persons and possibly in multiple places in the flow? And the answer is probably yes to all of those, but hopefully there's more people going to be involved in double checking this stuff, because he gave some very correct but pointed, observations to the audience. The hallucinations are still in unacceptably high levels right now.
Yeah.
And I don't want us to miss that point, because that was a message, that to me is really hit home lately. I was looking at a video somebody put on YouTube, and you could tell they didn't check it real well, because at one point there's a server bringing out a tray with what's supposed to be dinner in it for some World War II military officers. And I guess it's supposed to be a chicken dish, because there were 3 small Pulte chickens running around on the tray live. And no one caught that. That's how that was one of 2 or 3 tells that the AI that built that video didn't do it well. So this stuff has to be double checked if you're going to rely on it in any kind of business, mission critical kind of role. The consequences, the adverse consequences to a company and to a person in their career for getting it wrong could be quite severe. By the way, there was an article today about one of the big 4 got caught with a computer AI generated big report and study, and it turned out a whole bunch of the statistical citations in it were all made up hallucinations in AI. And there were some people snidely remarking, and still no one will get fired for this. I don't think that's going to be true. I think someone's going to get whacked for messing up like that.
So, Brian, I wanted to ask you for a reaction, because there were a few things that I thought were a little bit different about how they talked about AI today. And one of them was a sort of aggregated intelligence thing that fits into their community intelligence framework. But in this case, it was basically what they've been learning about what they call the early signals, the predictive signals that they can pick up on, in this case from automobile data, right? And they talked about how they were really surprised by how using anonymized opt-in data across the network of customers, they're starting to see where their customers can act before the public data catches up, right? And this is a really big thing, because even if you're getting really accurate data to your agents from your ERP systems don't see everything, right? And they may not pick up on certain kinds of signals that are happening, like, in the case of supply chains, for example, there might be like immediate port impacts that some customers are experiencing that could benefit all of your customer base if they knew were happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what did you think about that was Arturo on stage talking about that. What did you think about that? Was that interesting to you? And is that an area that catches your attention?
I've been really bullish on event-driven systems for decades. And the signal discussion that they introduced today was right on the money. And I'll put a little more color around the example you were sharing from the keynote. And that imagine if you were monitoring things like rail car shipments that have automobile frames on them, or pickup truck frames mostly, or other kinds of parts, and the movement of them. And if you're seeing a drop off in the number of rail cars being in use hauling these supplies, then the manufacturer has scaled back the requirements, and that's not public knowledge. But if you knew that, then you would know, well, maybe that particular commodity is going to go down in price, and maybe I want to wait or defer on buying some of that same kind of material. Signals are a forward-looking, but not a accounting-based transaction indicator of what a company needs to run itself well. And the best kind of signals out there don't fit in the neat old data model of an ERP package. And yet here these guys were talking about this as a future direction for where systems and Epicor in particular will go. That is 100% right on the money. So I don't have, I'd love to hear more conversations about this kind of stuff from other ERP vendors. But right now we can't hear those conversations because they're all so giddy, jumping up and down, going, let me show you my latest new Gen AI kind of bauble that we inserted in the human resource application.
Yeah, it seems very, very promising. And I think what's one thing that's interesting is that it does require customers helping each other out. And I think what we're starting to see is that companies in certain industries are willing to share that data in the interest of their collective gains. We're seeing a lot more industry consortiums where that kind of information is shared on an anonymized basis. And Epicor was telling me that they've seen that in their customers already, their willingness to share certain kinds of competitive information, because in a way that we're all in it together, right? We're all trying to compete in these industries that can be, dictated by very large entities. And how do we compete against that and shine within the supply chain? And so when you have that culture, then the next step is the so-called community intelligence that they're describing. And they're one of the only vendors in my history that's used that phrase. Coupa's used that for some years, and they've done some really cool things with it. And I was talking with Epicor about this today, about all the potential for embedding intelligent network benchmarks into your software to kind of indicate, hey, this is something your competitors are doing right now that you're not doing, or this is an area to watch out for. I think there's a lot of potential, and it fits into this sort of like notion that I have of this real-time truth that you can provide agents with that help them to actually appear really relevant to your needs. And I really like it as an area for Epicor where they have kind of stood out a little bit to me. The other thing that they mentioned briefly that I talked with their team about a little bit more was reversibility. I really like that phrase, and I haven't heard that very much. And the idea is that, okay, you can give me explainability, which a lot of people talk about, but the ultimate thing is reversibility. Agent did something I didn't like, reverse it, undo it, take it back, fix it. And I really like that. And it might sound like really obvious, but it's not talked about that much.
Well, and the real wrinkle on that, believe it or not, is it's like why there's effective dating in traditional accounting systems, because there are different rules in effect, like what accounts were valid during certain dates, date ranges, what kind of transactions could or couldn't happen at a certain time, and who had the permissions, whatever. If you try and reverse it, you have to get all of that stuff synchronized back up, because you can't reverse a prior transaction using today's rules and accounts when it happened in the past. And it's not a simple thing to sort out. And that's right. That is absolutely cool. And I agree, the business need is going to be significant because we still don't have the designs of to-be processes nailed down where we know where all the humans in the middle are going to be and how quickly they're going to be able to react to the errors that they see and how they are going to react to them. It means that just about for every agent that's being put into things like Epicor's agent marketplace, you're going to need a reversal agent to undo whatever it did. And that's probably going to be more code than what the original agent actually had in it.
Yeah, and they could probably play it up even more than they did, because a lot of the horror stories that scare people about AI are the things they read around, like, the famous one, or the Facebook alignment officer whose OpenClaw agent like destroyed her email inbox, or this guy we know, Jason Lemkin, who built an agent that destroyed his production environment.
Yeah.
And just to be able to hit the undo button would have been pretty cool in those situations. And the Facebook AI alignment officer like desperately trying to unplug her computer because that's the only way to stop the agent from doing what it's doing. So I think it's good messaging on their part, and now they have to figure out how to get more customers along that path. I did talk with a customer today that I'm going to be writing about that has actually used some of the Reed agents. So the first Prism agents that they put out a couple years ago, they started by exposing agents where you could query the knowledge base and stuff like that. And so there was a customer that had kind of gone through some of that and had moved to the cloud and was kind of now in position to adapt to some new agents. But then I talked with another customer that isn't quite there yet and wants to learn more and is part of the early adopter program, but doesn't quite know where to go yet. And that customer said they would have wanted to hear a little more today in the opening remarks on kind of like, okay, like great vision. They love the vision, but like, what do I do next? Like, how do I now apply this inside my organization? And so, look, you're not going to get everything done on the stage, but I think that'll be the interesting thing for Epicor is to like take these customers from wherever they're at into the next place they need to go. And they have some really good answers to that because they've kind of identified a bunch of stages where you start by using cloud implementation tools to get to the cloud and get there fast, and then start using some of the read-only agents to get comfortable with some of that, and then start looking at the agents that can read and write, the so-called agents systems of action or whatever. Like, so they have some pretty good answers to kind of how you can progress along with this. And so it'll be interesting to see if they can get more customers on that path. So the next year, if you and I come back, we will really see more of this in action from the customer perspective.
Yeah, coming back next year, that would mean going to lovely Las Vegas, Nevada.
Mandalay Bay. So we switched to one of your favorite hotels, the Gaylord, to one of my favorite hotels, Mandalay Bay. Oh my God.
That could be you got to wear tennis shoes at that, whatever the venue is in Mandalay Bay. You were going to do some walking there.
No comment on Mandalay Bay. But, I like this conference. So, I would consider it. I don't have like a never go to Mandalay Bay policy, but I will admit it was not the top hotel on my list. Sorry, Epicor.
Mm-hmm.
So, Brian, did we leave anything out? We need to wrap. So
I think we've hit most of the high points. I mean, if I could just sum up, I would just say, if you've never been to one of Epicor's events, you would probably be surprised at the sheer amount of, let's call it mass, that there is. Lots of customers, lots of products, everything else. Probably way more than you thought.
And the other thing I just want to say in closing is that one of the phrases I like the most that they use, because they used a lot of kind of advanced lingo.
Democratize. We heard that about 100 times.
We heard democratize. I'm not going to comment on that one. I like the phrase perpetual MRP because I really like, I think this is honestly less about agentic AI and more about how can enterprise software be a lot more responsive to the needs of customers on a day-to-day. And enterprise software has never truly delivered on its promise. It's only delivered on part of it. And now it's getting harder because world conditions are so much more volatile. We need systems that really help us to adapt to that on a day-to-day basis. And while the idea of doing perpetual MRP is probably a little outlandish because no one wants to redo their MRP every hour, but the idea is we're not going to do this once a year anymore or once a month. We're basically going to have access to this kind of stuff all the time. Like, where do we stand as a business now? And one of the advantages companies like Epicor have, because they're not dealing with the largest of enterprises, is you can really reach the point of a so-called single source of truth around a lot of your core systems that are running on Epicor. And that delivers a lot of value. And a couple of the customers I talked to today talked about that. And one of them talked about how they're not arguing over data anymore because their users trust the data. And so now they can make decisions on that data because they tested it and they've seen when it says that your inventory on this part is low or out, it's correct. And if you start seeing that again and again, you start to trust it and say, the system's actually pretty close to actually what's going on in the real world. And you're starting to get benefits out of that. And what I'm here to tell you today is that you should already be deriving a lot of value out of these systems before you even think about AI. If you're not, you're doing something wrong. And what I heard today is these customers are doing a lot of things right. And they said to me, look, we're going to be in a really good position now to add AI to this mix, but we couldn't unless we have this foundation in place. And I think to me, that's the heart of the SaaS is not dead narrative.
Yeah, there were a number of speakers who talked about that, and they were referencing, let's call them error rates, where stuff could have been 30 to almost 50% in error, getting it down to a percent or two at most in error. And those were huge changes for these companies. And the impact for the software user were considerably happier customers. Customer sat would go way up because they could actually deliver on the products that were being ordered. They had this stuff. and the customer knew when they were going to get it.
And with no AI in the mix at all, a customer told me that they used to have to do all these manual, very tedious inventory tracking processes. Once they got on to the Epicor or the cloud release or whatever, they did it after a year, millions of transactions, and there were a discrepancy of like 10 boxes. And they were like, this is totally changing like what we're trying to do. And so the point being, like, get your house in order, then do your AI, and I think you're going to be a lot happier. And that message was loud and clear. And all right, let's wrap it, Brian. We're at diminishing returns. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.